My theme this morning was suggested by a verse in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 14, verse 14, where he mentions Noah, Daniel, and Job, described as three paragons of virtue. And this morning I want to give a brief profile of each of them. I'm sure Ezekiel thought that they were all real characters. We might not agree. The story of Noah is quite well known, how he was instructed to build an ark, take his wife and his three sons and their wives, because there was a flood coming. Everything else would be destroyed. It was a time for a new beginning. We're told the names of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. They were to become the founders of nations. Shem would result in the Semites. Ham would be, from Ham would be produced the darker skinned nations. Remember that. We're not told the names of their wives. I think we can discount the theory that Noah's wife was Joan of Arc. So the story goes that a pair of each animal species was put into the ark. What's perhaps not so well known is that there were 7 pairs of the creatures that were deemed to be pure. Why was that? Well, we get an explanation after the flood. The first action that Noah took was to build an altar and sacrifice some of these creatures. This burnt offering, it was to start a long trend. And actually, the other alternative name for these burnt offerings was Holocaust. But that signifies something else now, so we tend not to use it in this context. Noah got involved with viticulture, and he started producing wine. And then one occasion he got drunk and was found by Ham lying asleep and naked. And we're told that Ham mentioned this to his brothers. Now we wonder why. Was he asking his brothers what we should do about it? And the brothers certainly knew. They discreetly covered him up. But I suspect that Ham was having a bit of a snigger. And certainly Noah, when he woke up, had this idea. And the result of this is that Ham's descendants, specifically the Canaanites, who sprouted from Ham, the Canaanites were cursed. We actually told that Ham had a son called Canaan. The point of many of these early stories in the Bible is to suggest origins of later customs or activities. And I'm quite sure that when the Hebrews were going into the promised land, when they were facing the Canaanites, they remembered the story of Ham and his son Canaan. And that was their justification for their activities. And much later in the 19th century, the Negro peoples were often referred to as the children of Ham. And this was used as a justification for enslaving them. The Bible's a dangerous book. The second name mentioned by Ezekiel was Daniel. But which one? Surely there can't be any doubt. We know the book of Daniel. There are two possible objections to it being this Daniel. As far ago as the 3rd century, philosopher Porphyry claimed that the book of Daniel belonged not to the 6th century BC, but to the 2nd, the time of the Maccabee revolution. Not everybody believes that, but it is quite commonly believed now that Porphyry was right. Another difficulty is the order in which Ezekiel mentions these characters: Noah, Daniel, Job. Now, Noah and Job obviously sort of belong to an earlier period. You would think Daniel will be mentioned last. So is there another Daniel? Well, as recently as around about 1930, some archaeological discoveries revealed a Daniel who was a Canaanite. Back to the Canaanites again. There's a story about he was described as a wise and good man. So he seems a possible candidate. But actually the story that's told sidelines Daniel and has more to say about his son and the various Canaanite gods and goddesses make an appearance. Now the question I ask, would Ezekiel, the Hebrew prophet, be praising a Canaanite? So let's get back to the book of Daniel. Can we make a case for him? If you look at the book of Daniel, think first of its position in the Bible. In most of our Bibles, he appears with the prophets. But in the Hebrew Bible and in the Eastern Orthodox Bible, he's not with the prophets. He's with the collection known as the writings. The book is divided into 2 parts. First 6 chapters are narrative, describing life in Babylon. And the second part of the book, chapter 7 to 12, are prophecies. Now, the traditional view of this is that Daniel and 3 friends were part of the Hebrew captivity in Babylon. But Daniel and his friends had been chosen to serve King Darius. And like Joseph, Daniel was skilled in interpreting dreams. And so he was prospering quite well under Darius. But then a situation occurred. Darius had a golden statue erected, and everybody was supposed to bow down to this. And of course, Daniel and his 3 friends refused to do so, and they were punished. I'll come back to the punishment. Now, what about these prophecies? Were they the work of Daniel? As I say, Daniel wasn't one of the prophets. I think that there's no doubt that the book belongs to the later period, 2nd century BC. but I'm sure it incorporates a tale from the earlier period of Daniel. I think Daniel was a real character. But the book that bears its name is very much embellished. For example, we've got the story of his 3 friends who were thrown into the furnace. You know that one. There's a nice little ditty about that. Shadrach was a prophet who was chucked into the fire, expected by the stokers to immediately expire. But when the door was opened, the asbestos laddie laughed and said, "Me hearties, keep it shut, I cannot stand the draught." Daniel was well respected. There were many stories told of him. Even in the Apocrypha, there's 2 stories where he acted as a detective. And Dorothy Sayers included these 2 stories in an anthology of detective stories. But the story that we know best about Daniel is of being thrown into the den of the lions. And Nicholas Fairchild Lindsay wrote a poem about this, which has the feeling of a Negro spiritual, as you find out. Because Bill's going to read a shortened version of it. And when we come to the bit about the lions, I want you all to join in. I'll give you a sign.
Thanks, Norman. Just a point there, if this was in BC, Daniel couldn't have been a Christian, then could he? I don't suppose. The Daniel Jazz by Nicholas Lindsay. Darius the Mede was a king and a wonder. His eye was proud and his voice was thunder. He kept bad lions in a monstrous den. He fed the lions on Christian men. Daniel was the chief hired man of the land. He stirred up the jazz in the palace band, just like David. He whitewashed the cellar, he shoveled the coal, and Daniel kept a praying, "Lord, save my soul." Daniel was a butler, a swagger and a swell. He ran up. His sweetheart and his mother were Christian and meek. They washed and ironed for Darius every week. One Thursday he met them at the door, paid them as usual, but acted sore. He said, "Your Daniel is a dead little pigeon. He's a good hard worker, but he talks religion." And he showed them Daniel in the lion's cage. Daniel standing quietly, the lions in a rage. His good old mother cried, "Lord, save him." And Daniel's tender sweetheart cried, "Lord, save him." And she prayed to the Lord, "Send Gabriel, send Gabriel." King Darius said to the lions, "Bite Daniel, bite Daniel. Bite him, bite him." Thus roared the lions, "We want Daniel, Daniel, Daniel." Daniel did not frown. Daniel did not cry. He kept on looking at the sky. And the Lord said to Gabriel, "Go chain the lions down." And Gabriel chained the lions, and Daniel got out of the den. And Darius said, "You're a Christian child." And he gave him his job again.
And our 3rd character is Job. It's a long and quite involved book, much of which I'm going to ignore. It's a story within a story. The basic story is that Job was a good man with great riches. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And then he lost everything. He not only lost everything, but suffered great health problems. He's afflicted in body. And then 3 friends who were called comforters, not a very appropriate name as it happened. They said, in accordance with the accepted ideas of the time, to have suffered all this, Job must have committed some great sin, which he denied. And he was prepared to argue his case with God if he got the chance. He did, actually. They talk about the patience of Job. Most modern versions of the Bible translate that as perseverance. I would call it stubbornness. That's the basic story at the center of it. But then somebody embellished this with the story, bringing in God and Satan, and they fixed the whole thing. Satan was saying if Job suffered, he would soon curse God, which he didn't. He didn't curse God, but he certainly felt he had a case against him. He didn't believe the accepted idea that ill fortune meant some sin. Then we're told that God appeared to him. Job didn't get the chance to present his case because God, in effect, just said, "Oh, stop your argument, just accept things as they are." I agree with the opinion of Virginia Woolf, who, when she read the book of Job, said, "I don't think God comes well out of it." God did condemn the comforters for their activities, but Job interceded. I think this showed the essential goodness of Job and interceding for the comforters. We're told that after all this, Job's goods were returned and somehow his family were restored to him. Can't understand that, but that's what the book says. If the purpose of the book was to show that goodness didn't necessarily bring advantage and that evil didn't necessarily get its deserts, this ending to the story of him everything being restored just doesn't fit. But he had his 7 sons and his 3 daughters, and surprisingly, we told the names of the daughters, but not the sons. It's the other way around with Noah. Now remember, Noah did this burnt offering as they had started the trend. And burnt offerings come very much into the book of Job. They appear quite early in his family situation. And when he was interceding for his comforters, he used burnt offerings. Now, George Bernard Shaw had some comments on this. George Bernard Shaw was quite a character. He certainly knew his Bible and often quoted it. But his sort of religious outlook was described in his own words: "I am an unbeliever, but I sometimes have doubts." And I want to finish with these sayings of George Bernard Shaw that were prompted by the incidents of the burnt offerings. The God of Noah is not the God of Job. Contemplate the angry deity who drowned every living thing on earth except one family of each species in a fit of raging disgust at their wickedness, and then allowed the head of the one human family to appease him by the sweet savour of a heap of burning flesh. Job's God is a great advance on Noah's God, despite the very suspicious touch of Noah's God in the matter of the sacrifice of 7 bullocks and 7 rams. Micah will not have Noah's God or even Job's God. He raises the conception of God to the highest point it has ever attained by his fiercely contemptuous denunciation of the blood sacrifices and his inspired and inspiring demand, "What doth the Lord require of thee but to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with thy God?" Before this victory of the human spirit over crude superstition, Noah's God and Job's God go down like skittles. There is an end to them. Jesus is an advance in the theology of Micah. For man walking humbly before an external God is an ineffective creature compared to man exploring as the instrument embodiment of God with no other guide than the spark of divinity within him. Yet we find Paul holding up Christ to the Ephesians as an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling savour, thereby dragging Christianity back and down to the level of Noah. None of the apostles rose above that level, and the result was that the great advances by Micah and Jesus were cancelled, and historical Christianity was built up on the sacrificial altar of Jehovah, with Jesus as the sacrifice. 600 years after Jesus, Muhammad founded Islam and made a colossal stride ahead to a very enlightened Unitarianism. I think it's time for a few moments of reflection and prayer. As we reflect on the stories, let us think what we can draw from them, what lessons. Can we take things at face value? Or are there hidden meanings? Are these three characters, Noah, Daniel, and Job, all that the Bible, what they meant to their contemporaries is not necessarily what they mean to us. But we are grateful to have these stories that we can reflect on, for all the writings that survived, for leaders long ago who sifted, copied, and preserved the Bible as we know it. We give thanks and find in its story promise and strength, the model of emerging faith, alive with hope for all. Amen.
And I hope you don't mind me doing this, but I was reminded of a poem I studied at school by the service, and this is by Siegfried Sassoon. So if it's all right with everybody, we've got a couple of minutes there, so I'm just going to read it because I'm the secretary and I can. When Noah stared across the floods, sky and water melted into one looking glass of shifting tides and sun. Mountain tops were few, the ship was foul. All the morn, old Noah marvelled greatly at this weltering world that shone so stately. Drowning deep the rivers and the plains, through the stillness came a rippling breeze. Noah sighed, remembering the green trees. Clear along the morning stooped a bird, lit beside him with a blossomed sprig. Earth was saved, and Noah danced a jig.